This is about life. This is about human beings. We use the word like pro-life. I think it's a lie. It's not pro-life or pro-choice.
And then we put all the burden now on women. Women become the center stage, pro-life, pro-choice, all of that, it's all on her. Because the man that conceived the baby in the first place is not in the picture, right?
To manipulate and to play with the word of God in order to justify your stance, that's the height of arrogance. But this is a question of life and death, right? This is a question of what we might say is like inalienable human rights, right?
What if it's a question of personal responsibility? What if it's a question of personal morality? I mean, I think everyone, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, everyone agrees that there is some moral distinction between, the morning after pill and terminating pregnancy at 38 weeks.
So I think it's one of those topics that always gets a lot of attention and then kind of dies down again.
What topic?
Abortion.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't know that.
I was
yet.
leading up to, I was gonna it was gonna be the big reveal. Drum roll, please. Abortion. And it's just that topic that shows up, especially lately, when there's something happening in the Supreme Court, as recently the Supreme Court actually technically struck down most of what was established in the Roe v. Wade case,
Right.
That had become like law of the land. But the way that abortion is talked about today.
So wait, what about state rights? Is abortion still allowed in some states, right?
So essentially now the states get to rule.
Legislate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a
So
state by state
there's
matter.
no federal. No. So how does it work? Because Roe versus Wade protected abortion rights.
Right. Across the entire nation.
Right. So now there are no federal abortion rights, so states will have to decide for themselves, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So there'll be a state like Louisiana where it's extremely restricted. Mm-hmm. A state like California where it's
or Colorado, whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm. Or and even there's talk of if people go to another state to get an abortion, but they're residents of a different state, they can get in trouble in their home state. So there's all kinds of
and I think they can order medications and pills from another state that will be shipped into their state.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason I'm interested, and I think we chatted about this a little bit before, this is all very technical. This is all very kind of legal. But I thought, and I think most people, when they think of the debate on abortion, the conversation, the core of it was supposed to be a moral issue. This is about life. This is about human beings and when somebody is a human and when they deserve to have their rights protected, and very difficult issues like what happens if a woman conceives against her will, what happens to the child, what should happen, should she be forced to give birth, things like this. These are very difficult, moral, and sometimes even heart-wrenching issues. But I don't think that the conversation ever actually sounds like this.
Because no debate in America is anymore. Every debate is now about ideological loyalty and consistency. You have to take sides, and you need to decide which side to pick. And once you have decided, you just have to be consistent.
Yeah.
And more often than not, we end up accepting things just because this is what we're expected to do on this side of the divide.
No. So a political
that
party.
nuance is completely lost. So everything is converted into a political conflict, including essential moral issues like this that touch the lives of so many people.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the whole notion of red, blue, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, it's worth noting that this dynamic of there being two sides, only two sides, and you have to decide which side you're on and vehemently argue in support of that side and against the other side. For me, it looks like a classic example of how the political structure and the political dynamics that are established for us have had massive cultural implications on the way we think and the way we debate an issue that is really supposed to be super nuanced and very, very careful because of the lives at stake here.
Right.
But instead, it's just, okay, if you're a Democrat, or if you're leaning or a progressive, you need to be pro-abortion in every case. And if you're conservative or right-wing or Republican, you
have
need
to be
be
pro-life
against
in every case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it predates the American experiment, though. I think this binary way of seeing the world was invigorated by by the Enlightenment. I think the minute we started taking Aristotle seriously in the modern age and bringing into the modern experience the Aristotelian binaries and seeing the world as just ones and zeros, black and white, I think that affected everything that we experience today. You know, night and day. You know, fat and thin, healthy, unhealthy, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, weak, strong, poor, wealthy. All the continuum, the spectrum in between, is usually lost in these debates.
No.
And that obviously lends itself to debates about even like moral issues. You know, debates about fiscal responsibility, debates about abortion, social behavior, right? Like it's either you're pro-immigration, in which case you support porous borders and criminals, coming into the country illegally, or you are against immigration, in which you become like a supremacist.
Yeah.
And you hate anyone that is not born in this country. I think we can do better than that.
Yeah, each side becomes like just a slogan, right?
Yeah.
And we use the word like pro-life. I think it's a lie. It's not pro-life or pro-choice.
Isn't it interesting that most people who are associated with the pro-life movement are also the conservatives who would be okay with genocidal activities overseas that end up, murdering little children? Or, why should we even go overseas?
Yeah, it
just the way like kids are treated in this country, or the way that, children of immigrants are treated and locked up in these immigration facilities for months on end, receiving little food or, little to none, health care. That's okay.
Yeah.
But hey, we have to worry about life when it's in the form of, sperm and ovum and a clump of cells.
I think both slogans are
Not to suggest that life is not important, by the way. I'm just pointing out to the inconsistency of the dialogue.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Both slogans are really a lie. They're actually not what they say, right? So on the one side, you have the pro-life argument, and just as you described it, those same pro-life people are not consistently pro-life in all cases, right? So foreign policy is very anti-life in so many places, whether that's in the Middle East right now or in so many other places. It's been very anti-life, right?
Even locally, I mean, these are the same people that do not support, the welfare state. They do not support Social Security. They do not support, free health care for all. And so which life are we pro here? Exactly.
Yeah, and so there's this angle, right? Life is limited to just this debate. And then, funny enough, the opposite side, pro-choice, here's a question on choice. Are there two parents involved or one parent involved in the conception of a child?
Exactly.
If life begins at conception, what about the choice of the father?
Yeah.
Right?
Everything that happens before conception.
Exactly. What about obviously that if that life, right, if that child is that biological life has rights, and we're going to debate those rights, at what point do we take the choices of that child seriously, right? So pro-choice is also a slogan that really doesn't mean what it sounds like it means. And both of these slogans are just used to corral people on one side of the argument or the other.
I don't know if you studied this in college. I actually remember when I was in Chicago, and I was taking a graduate seminar, and a discussion, I think, came up in the philosophy of ethics or something like this, if I remember correctly. And there was this discussion. Of course, we had to read, people like Martha Nussbaum and these so-called philosophers. I really don't know why we celebrate the ideas of those people. It really baffles me. We're very selective, I think, in Western society about the thinkers that we celebrate and the ones that we ignore and neglect. That too, by the way, is ideologically motivated.
Yeah.
So we would do, a Martha Nussbaum, or we would do like, Judith Thompson. I don't know if you remember her. She's the one that perpetuated the arguments that supported abortion. So she would she would basically equate the embryo in a mother's womb with a famous violinist. And she would say, like, and this is presumably philosophy, right? She would say, oh, if a woman woke up in the morning and there is a famous violinist who has kidney failure and is connected to her and is relying on her bloodstream and her own systems to survive, and he needs to be hooked up to the mother for 9 months in order to survive. She still does not have a responsibility, even though his life matters, but she doesn't have a responsibility to be the system that supports his life, literally. And so when she was attacked, because, come on, you cannot equate your own embryo, your own baby that you've conceived by choice. You are not, God forbid, raped or anything like that. You engage in a consensual relationship. You cannot compare the conception of a baby with a random violinist that was connected to you. So she perpetuated another argument that was also celebrated, that you see in philosophy books, right? Which says, okay, if a woman, feels very hot in the house and the AC is not working and she opens the windows and then she falls asleep, and then when she wakes up in the morning, she realizes that a burglar climbs into the apartment and just decided to stay there for 9 months, is she obligated to keep him?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Isn't that insane? This is the type of philosophical debate that took place, at the academic circles before, it kind of trickled down and found its way into policy and culture and, subsequent legislation and so forth. And then on the other hand, you have this guy, Don Marquis, whatever, we also studied him, who uses the argument of, a future like ours. And so if we feel obligated, to respect to morally respect people because they have a future, and that makes murder wrong because I have eliminated that person's future, well, guess what? The baby has a future.
Exactly. Yeah.
Therefore, eliminating that future, which just seems super truncated and very inefficient. An argument, because I don't know what that future looks like. What if the future of the baby is miserable?
Right. Well, doesn't a tree have a future?
The tree has a future, exactly. Right. Or the sperm can potentially have a future.
Right.
Does that mean we have a moral obligation to protect the sperm? Again, binary debates lead to ludicrous results.
Yeah. By the way, the example you gave, this argument that was perpetuated, philosophically unsound in my opinion, it still had such a massive impact on the conversation, because to this day, folks that are on we'll say the pro-choice side of the argument will say, oh, a woman should not be forced to keep the child, right? In the vast majority of these cases, these are people who engaged in consensual sexual activity,
right,
which is a choice they made, and they understood that this is a potential, result of this. There's no force involved, right? But we keep using that language. Oh, she's being forced to keep the burglar in her house, or forced to keep this child.
It's like saying, oh, someone has been behaving in a manner that is financially irresponsible, and now they have debt. Oh, why am I being forced to pay off my debt?
Right, exactly. So there's no sense of understanding that my choices have consequences, and so I should think about the choices that I make. And this could be a whole separate conversation here. When we talk about abortion as if it's just nonchalant, it's not that important, it's not really something that we should care about. Whoever wants to can just have it, right? Doesn't that also affect the behavior of society and the willingness of society to say, well, sexual promiscuity and sexual impropriety really has no consequences, because I can always just, if, in case I conceive a child, I can always just, get rid of the child, right? That's not a society we want to be a part of, that people just randomly aborting their pregnancies and aborting their children just because they behaved irresponsibly. How is that different than somebody who conceived, husband and wife conceived, they chose to conceive, and then maybe a few months later they just feel differently about the whole situation. That maybe they're angry or something. Like, you know what? forget this, and now they just choose to abort the child.
Exactly. Change their plans. This is what happens when we are governed by or allowing binary debates to govern our discourse, right? Because now everyone is focused on the embryo, the baby, conception, birth, like those 9 months, from the last menstrual period to the passing of the baby from the birth canal. That's all I'm focused on the debate. Okay, what happens before is irrelevant, and what happens after is irrelevant, right? For both camps, by the way, and I don't want to sound binary when I address it, but unfortunately I have to address the two camps. If we don't pay attention to what happens before conception, then that is what led to these results in the first place, right? When we are not teaching women that your dignity and your honor matters, and that you should expect commitment, and that you should not engage in casual sexual relationships, and that sex is not a recreational activity.
Right.
This is and that sex that is divorced from commitment and responsibility and love and long-term relationships and so forth can actually be harmful. Yeah, it can be fun and pleasurable, but it can also have dire consequences. When we are letting men get away with it and they feel like they can just sleep with anyone and conceive babies and sire children, I don't know if you've heard that term.
It's become popular now.
It's become popular.
Right.
And without any sense of consequence, I think that is extremely harmful. And what happens is that, yes, we can say all of those things, and then we put all the burden now on women.
Yeah.
Women become the center stage, pro-life, pro-choice, all of that, it's all on her.
Right.
Because the man that conceived the baby in the first place is not in the picture, right? And so the pro-choice crowd doesn't pay attention to all the factors that led to this type of pregnancy in the first place. And many of those women, by the way, their statistics have shown they're in their mid-20s. They're not necessarily opposed to the idea of having children. They're just fearful of the financial consequences. They're usually poor and they're usually struggling, right? Which takes me to what happens after. The pro-life crowd does not pay any attention to the factors that actually help in the survival of the child and the integrity of the family and keeping people together. So we keep telling this woman, you cannot abort, you cannot terminate pregnancy, yet we are not giving her proper paid leave. We're not giving her, free health care. We're not, allowing her to actually pay attention to this baby, maybe free child care, all the things. So all the responsibilities become on her.
Right.
And I think these are the parts of the debate that are lost when we become binary in the ways that we see things.
I think there's a reason why we approach the debate in a binary sense that goes beyond just the political realities of our time. It's not just about Republican, Democrat. I think the other aspect of this is that if you look at many of the world's faith traditions, there's actually very little actual moral guidance on this matter.
Correct.
So I was actually looking into, for example, Christianity, and traditionally, when you think of pro-life, you think this is very Christian perspective, and I think the Catholic Church is their official position, the Orthodox Church, the Evangelical Church. I think these are the kind of main groups that are what we would say pro-life and the engine behind the pro-life movement. And actually, if you look in the Bible, there's very, very little scriptural evidence to make them pro-life. There's very vague statements in the Bible.
So it's religious. It's a religious position, but it's not necessarily theologically grounded.
It's not theologically grounded, not in the Bible, to the degree.
Because I know in the Islamic tradition, it's very, very grounded in the scriptures.
Exactly. Yeah. This is what the point I wanted to make. If you look at Christianity, you'll find there's two kinds of Christians on this matter, and it's because there's really very little in the Bible to give you either direction. If you look at Judaism, you'll find that in Judaism it's just as soon as the child is born, but before that there's actually very little care, right? Even if you look at other traditions, Hinduism and Sikhism, there's almost zero actual foundational content, very specific scriptural direction. And so because of that, people are now left open to interpret these vague statements in these
manufacture their own positions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times what's happening is not that the faith or the morality of somebody is guiding their position, but rather they are taking a position and then they're manipulating their faith in order to justify that position, right? Which is the last thing you want to do, to manipulate and to play with the Word of God in order to justify your stance. That's the height of arrogance. Both sides seem to do this freely. I think the one faith tradition where there is actual incredible clarity is the Islamic tradition.
Right.
And that was actually pretty powerful for me, that there's so much detail on what should be done at what stage, depending on what's happening, and when is it that the child before birth has rights, when is it that the child is considered a human and has even funeral rights and things like this.
And that is a really important discussion. But I want to go back to what you said earlier, and that is, in the absence of universally agreed upon definitions and notions as to what constitutes moral viability, of the human being, we are always left to our own devices to decide. And that's why you have this wide spectrum of views, between those who say, like you said earlier, I'm not sure if this is the position of Jews today, but you're saying that this is the some of the statements in the Jewish religious tradition, that it's birth basically.
Right.
So the passing of the baby through the birth canal,
right,
that is what constitutes the moral character of the baby. Now it has to be respected as a human being, which again sounds a little bit arbitrary, because what about the day before?
Right.
The baby is perfectly alive. We hear its heartbeat. It's moving and everything. That doesn't seem like a legitimate line to me. And then some would say, well, it's the age of viability. 20 or 22 weeks, whatever. It used to be a little bit later, but now with the advancement of medicine,
the age of viability keeps shifting.
But the age of viability keeps shifting, and it seems like it's more of a range, really, than an actual given moment, right? And then, some would say 16 weeks, some would say, 120 days, some would say 8 weeks, some would say conception.
Right.
Right? I don't think that anyone says before, and by the way, conception and last menstrual cycle,
exactly,
are not the same thing either.
Still vague.
And so, nobody says that, before the egg and the sperm, met. No one is worried about that part of it. So where do we decide? And I feel like sometimes maybe we have to ask ourselves, if we don't have a physical line to draw, what if there is a metaphysical line to draw? Yeah. Isn't that the value of faith? And I'm not just referring to the Islamic tradition here. I am just saying, we've been killing this debate and we're not able to emerge, successful.
Yeah.
So what if the solution resides in some type of a metaphysical approach to this matter? What is it the scriptures have said about the age of viability? Mm-hmm. And then kind of go from there and see if it makes sense, scientifically or culturally.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is, this debate only rose up so severely when abortion became something that was easily accessible and not dangerous to both child and mother, right? So now that's not dangerous to the mother, it's more available, it's more possible. And so even historically speaking, that line shifted. Before it was okay, this is a really serious thing. We need to do it only if it's an extreme situation, because the medical tools don't even really exist for us to do this safely for the mother who supposedly might be trying to save her life or whatever. Now you can do it with a lot more ease. Mm. But now that the debate has shifted, I think it's proof for us that without some kind of moral guidance, we're never going to settle this debate. We're always going to be willing to go back and forth, because if you have to base it on some kind of scientific reality, scientific and technological realities will change, and then we'll have to have the debate again. But this is a question of life and death, right? This is a question of what we might say is inalienable human rights, right? And that's clearly a metaphysical reality. Those are metaphysical things. If we believe, even if you believe in human rights, okay, but where are those human rights coming from? right?
And by the way, the approach has always been, like in the modern era, the approach has always been, how can I write good, effective laws, right? How can I draw the line? Like, see, even that is kind of what this debate is about. Where do we draw the line? Before which the baby or the embryo is not morally or viable or whatever, and after which the baby would be considered a moral entity, in which case, it or he or she,
well, that's a different debate.
needs to be protected, right?
Yeah.
But what if it's not? What if it's none of this? What if it's not a question of law and drawing a line between right and wrong? What if it's a question of personal responsibility? What if it's a question of personal morality? I mean, I think everyone, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, everyone agrees that there is some moral distinction between, the morning after pill and terminating pregnancy at 38 weeks.
Yeah.
I think 99% of us can agree that the first one might be okay, the second one looks like it's wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so this is a matter of moral intuition, and I think it seems like as we move away from the center, we're agreeing that as we move a little bit closer and closer, we start disagreeing, right? So instead of trying to find that fulcrum, maybe we're talking about a range. And so if you're a mother, and of course, as a Muslim, I'm bound by a different set of limitations, right? We have the scholarly debate between, the
40 days and 120
exactly,
days.
the 40 days and the 120 days and all of that, right? That's separate from the matter. I'm talking about public debate here in America. What if the criteria that we're looking at is personal responsibility, where people are taught to make moral decisions? They're taught to take moral responsibility and accountability for their own actions. Even if the law says it's okay, if you as a mother feel the baby in your belly and you've developed a bond and a connection with the baby, you should never attempt to terminate the pregnancy. And if I think that this plays a completely different role in the debate that is often forgotten. These metaphysical components of our moral character and application. Even Aristotle, talks about how harmful it would be to take some moral paradigm and to try to apply it to every single situation without any type of nuance, without any type of adjustment, and paying attention to the particulars and stuff like that. Little did he know that he is responsible for these problems in the first place. But I feel like that part is often forgotten.
So let me pose a question to you, and maybe we can think this out. What would be the foundations of that kind of moral framework? What would be the key points that we want society at large to buy into, and also individuals in their personal lives to buy into, that would make this debate, for the most part, irrelevant, because the moral framework gives people the guidance that they need?
So, for example, let's take the 40 days after the last menstrual cycle. Like, in those 40 days, we're not going to say to women that it's illegal for you to terminate the pregnancy. We're going to let women, after providing them with the right type of resources, that's really important, resources that will encourage them to actually keep the baby, and then let them decide in those 40 days based on their own moral intuition whether they want to keep the baby or not. In the Islamic tradition, there's all these debates that, the ensoulment of the baby, happens after, right? So even religiously, we're not as concerned, about that. And then, after that, from 40 days to maybe 120 days, it becomes like something that needs to be justified.
Right.
Like you have to.
So it's not completely prohibited, but there needs to be a good reason.
There have to be a good reason. So, some kind of condition needs to be diagnosed, or maybe like social workers would be able to say, that her economic conditions are absolutely catastrophic, she's homeless, or, there is potential that this baby might affect her health, some argument, right? And then after 120 days, this would be a separate tier. We would basically prohibit abortion unless the baby poses a direct threat to the mother, that the baby is proven to have a deformity that will interfere with normal, viable, functional life, or something absolutely serious that was only discovered then. Right. And this would eliminate all the other possibilities, right? if it was a mistake, an unplanned pregnancy, or God forbid, rape or something like this. All of this is discovered in the first couple of weeks, in which case termination can take place. I am not suggesting policy. I am just saying we have to approach this a little bit different.
So I think that this kind of description of how we can approach pregnancy and how we can give guidelines is super useful. But I think somebody will push back. Somebody from the maybe pro-life camp will say, well, isn't this allowing and making space for promiscuity? And, because there's going to be people who are going to just be rampantly terminating pregnancies, within the first 40 days because they're just acting irresponsibly. So what do we respond with that?
I mean, I don't know if we can fix all problems of society and fix everyone's behavior. I think we're just focused on one thing, and our existing debate is not getting us anywhere. And the polarizing that this debate is causing is not helping, is not fixing the problem. All I'm saying is that maybe we need to espouse some spectrum, right? There are situations where the termination of pregnancy feels morally valid to me and to many people, right? If a woman was forced to have this baby, right? Forced to conceive a baby that she did not consensually participate in this relationship, she was raped, right? I feel like it would be unfair for us to ask her to keep this baby for the rest of her life, right? If the baby poses a real direct threat to her health, or it might actually cause her to die, I think that the mother and her health, seem to me like on the scale would come before and precede the health and the survival of the fetus, right? If the mother is in such extreme conditions, economically or socially, that she literally does not even have shelter, and she would bring a baby to this world in order for that baby to greatly suffer, I'm not sure if this would be like proper circumstances either. Some might disagree, right? If the baby has severe deformities, that would prevent them from being independent, right? So there's a spectrum, there's nuance, about all of this. And so I need to look at this, time period, from the last menstrual cycle until the passage of the baby, through the birth canal. And I need to ask myself, what would justify termination in the first couple of weeks? What would justify termination in the first couple of months? Is termination justifiable, in the 6th or the 7th month? Like, what do you know today that you did not know before? And so there's a threshold. And once that threshold is passed, then the prohibition becomes permanent.
Yeah.
And before that, like I said, there'd be two tiers. One of them is you have to justify it, and the other one, maybe it could be, I don't want to say whimsical, but then it would be left to that person's moral choice and moral devices, especially when statistics have shown us that 95% of women don't abort on whimsical grounds.
Yeah.
They choose, termination because of real reasons, or at least perceived reasons, and conflicts and struggles that they are going through.
Yeah, I would say maybe three things here. The first one is that I think the early period, like that whole notion of the early period, you say the first 40 days, I think that chunk of time deals with one very serious issue, is that if the woman is forced to conceive, right? That seems to be the most important thing that needs to be considered in that time frame. It's very strange to imagine a situation where a woman is forced to conceive, but she has to make the decision after that 40-day period.
Like,
right?
why would she wait?
What was the delay, right? And if the delay is some kind of like availability of the resources, that's a social problem. We as a society should not allow for those kind of situations to play out. And we as a society should judge ourselves harshly if such things are happening regularly, that a woman who is forced to conceive is not able to get the access and the care immediately to be able to make that decision in a time frame where we would all say this seems moral still. And then there's that second chunk of time where there's like a second set of considerations which seem to be more to do with the health of the mother and the health of the child, right? If that child has some, conditions that essentially make it so that life is not viable or very limited, very truncated, or presents some kind of serious threat to the mother's health, like you have that 120-day period to decide. And again, it resolves that problem in a very moral way. And then if at that point, that's when ensoulment is taking place. After that, yes, there are situations where, one life has to be prioritized over another because one of them is going to be lost. Those are very extreme situations.
Yeah, like she developed preeclampsia at her 34th week or something like that.
Right, and it became severe.
Absolutely serious and severe, like she could literally die, things like that.
Right, so I think the reason I'm mentioning this is because that kind of moral clarity, I think, is a better solution than the kind of like science-based or like viability-based or this many weeks feels right, or if you look at the ultrasound of the child, it looks more like a child, so now we should treat it more like a child. Like these things all just feel arbitrary and still feel immoral. And so I thought that the clarity from the tradition that these many days, this is viable at these many days, and something else is acceptable. Excuse me, at these many days, and then something else is acceptable in a later time period. That's helpful. The other thing, though, is the poverty question. Right? I think this one is the one that makes me uneasy, and I think it probably makes many people uneasy. You imagine like a homeless woman, and then she conceives a child, and she herself is maybe not only homeless but has all kinds of like issues, and maybe is addicted to drugs, etc.
Exactly.
And then she's going to have a child, and so we say to ourselves, well, maybe it's legitimate for this woman to abort the pregnancy. Number one, I would wonder like at what stage. Number two, I would wonder, I think more importantly, again, why are we in a society where like that's even allowed to happen? That she's walking the streets like this. And in a society where a woman, let's say she's homeless but in her right mind, right? And she just has economic catastrophe in her life. Why are we living in a society where we're okay that woman has to make that choice rather than her knowing, what, this child is going to be taken care of? Because I'm a mother-to-be, me and my child are going to be taken care of. And for anyone who says that, well, we don't have the resources for this, we don't have the financial resources to be able to provide that level of like health care and support, that's just a lie. Like we have more than enough resources to spend killing other people's kids in other parts of the world. I think we can just use that money to raise and protect our own children.
It's not just about that, right? It's about the entire ethos. It's about why this woman got pregnant in the first place. I mean, you have to ask, why is she on the streets, right? And then you have to ask, why is she having sexual relations with random people? And then you have to ask, why is she not using contraception? And then you have to ask, after she has the baby, why is society not providing shelter? And then you have to ask, why does she not have a job? And then you have to ask, why is she not connected to a family? There is all these people that kind of fall off are the safety nets of society and fall through the cracks and get completely lost. There is so much work. Our approach to the question of abortion needs to be comprehensive as a society. Otherwise, you're just being hypocritical. Yeah. It becomes talking points, it becomes anger and passion rather than a desire for real solution. And this is why we're not able to fix it, because we're not having these types of debates. We need to train young children from a young age, especially girls. Don't give yourself up to someone unless that person deserves it, unless that person passes the litmus tests, unless that person is willing to embrace you as his wife and be with you, for the foreseeable future, right? And stop treating sexuality as a casual encounter. And quite honestly, and I say this carefully as a man of faith, if you do, if you have to, engage in sexual relations, then make sure that does not lead to pregnancy. Then we have to take contraception very seriously. And I know some people get upset hearing this as because, now you're advocating for promiscuity as long as it's protected sex. it's tiers, it's layers, and we have to address all of them. And if we fail to fix one, then at least we have to make sure that
Right.
we don't fail in the other, and the other, and the other.
Yeah, that goes back to the original point that without moral clarity at every level, we're not going to actually solve this debate. We're just going to be like, in our tower on one extreme or the opposite extreme. And anyone who comes to the middle and says, hey, by the way, here are good solutions. Oh, look, this guy is legitimizing the murder of children, or this guy is legitimizing promiscuity. Again, we're not going to actually have the debate. We're not going to actually solve the problems.
Right.
And I think if we really are serious about the debate on abortion, because it's a matter of life and death for the child, and many times a matter of life and death for the mother, then we should not mix that debate up with debates on promiscuity. There are other ways to solve those problems, which need to be solved. There are other conversations that should be had. But this debate, we should sincerely have it and offer sincere solutions without being scared that we're going to be accused by one side or the other of, being immoral for whatever reason.
Absolutely.
Thanks for breaking the script.
Thanks for breaking the script, Abdullah.